We are.
Welcome, everybody. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Maybe we'll just spend a second to introduce ourselves. I am Jen O'Brien. I am a senior policy fellow at Chapin Hall, and I'm joined by Stacie Kinney.
Hi, everyone. Stacie Kinney. I am Section Chief of the Family Centered Safety and Support Section here at the California Department of Social Services.
Thanks, Stacie. And Elizabeth, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Waugh, and I'm a project assistant at Chapin Hall with Jen.
And we have wonderful Regina Wong on helping us navigate everything. Thank you, Regina, for being here. So we're here to make sure that we give you an overview of a resource that hopefully you've had a second to look at. It's connected to the WOVA agenda as well, or the slide deck. And it is a contract guidance for county departments, and it's intended to help you embed within your contracts, MOUs, statements of work, whatever it is that you use when you are engaging EBP providers. And so we did our best to try to integrate a lot of really detailed information into this deck today so that we could give you an overview of how the contract guidance is intended to be used, let you practice a little bit, and then see if we can answer a couple of questions as we go through. So I'm going to keep us moving forward. Our overarching goal is to introduce contract language to help clarify, let me advance that slide, to help clarify roles, expectations, and improvement cycles. We believe contracts are clear about CQI expectations, that when they're clear about CQI expectations, that prevention programs will run smoothly and consistently across providers. So we know that getting that contract language nailed down is really helpful. And we've built this guidance with examples to be adapted to meet your needs. So a great deal of flexibility is planned within the guidance. Okay, I've touched on what this session is. Let me be clear about what it is not. So we're not going to provide any legal advice. We're not going to even try to wear a hat of your county counsel or your legal advisors who will want to make sure that whatever contract, again, you put together to be able to reference the CQI expectations, federal and state expectations, they'll have to go through and make sure that there's legalese and legal language that guide and inform the way in which your county tends and plans to work with the providers. We'll provide a deep dive into the guidance sections that are embedded in this, but you're still going to need to align everything with your system, your partners, and your models that your county has chosen to integrate into your CPP. We'll provide templates and things for you to kind of think through, but there's still a lot of individualization that'll be done. And we stayed true, folks. We didn't add CQI expectations that were not part of the federal or state CQI expectations that are embedded in the Family First Prevention Services Act. So again, trying to be as straightforward as we can without adding to. Overarching learning objectives. So just want to make sure that we quickly cover those. Understand the core components of the EBP CQI contracting guidance, how it supports alignment with the federal and state expectations. We want to apply practical strategies for translating EBP and purveyor CQI expectations into clear, usable contract language. We will work through an application of two different EBPs. These are the two most prominent EBPs that have been across the state in the CPPs. It's PAT, Parents as Teachers, and MI, Motivational Interviewing. So we kind of embedded some examples that hopefully will make connections to many of your CPPs. And then finally, we're going to identify opportunities to strengthen CQI alignment in local contracts and determine realistic next steps with the right partners. Okay, so lots of introductory slides. Without any more fanfare, let's go forward and tell you about the contract guidance. Elizabeth is going to drop in the chat for me shortly a link to the guidance on the CFPIC website, just in case you haven't been able to pull it off the WOVA link or it's something that you're not real familiar with. And Stacie, Elizabeth, Regina, can you guys all help me with the chat with the multiple screens? I'm not able to see it, so please interrupt, jump in at any time.
Yep,
Okay.
of course.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. Why did we do this? What's the point of all of this? I'm going to hand it over to Stacie, and she is going to set the stage a little more with the state expectations.
Yes, thank you, Jen. Okay, so for the next couple slides, the purpose of them is really to just talk through why embedding CQI expectations and contracts is a practical necessity. So grounding CQI in contracting ensures alignment with state and federal Family First prevention services requirements and demonstrates that CQI is not just extra work. It's essential for meeting compliance, quality, and accountability expectations. And CQI being included in FFPS contracts, again, is required under FFPSA. But again, it ensures fidelity to the evidence-based practices. It provides a reliable data for performance evaluation and for e-claiming. And it helps identify and address issues early and supports that consistent statewide implementation that drives better outcomes for the children and families that we serve. So I will say it a couple of times with CQI and it being required under FFPS, and the counties must show ongoing quality oversight to meet state and federal expectations. So the contracts really provide that formal structure to define the CQI roles and responsibilities and expectations of all the prevention partners who are involved in that. And so embedding CQI into the contract supports that consistency and accountability for those strong data practices, as well, again, as the fidelity monitoring and that CQI improvement across the implementation of the FFPS program. On the side, you can kind of see where it says contracts help make three things explicit. So that roles, again, who's responsible for what role in the CQI process, the information flow, how the data is being reported, how it's being communicated between the partners, and then learning and improvement, how insights are being used to adjust practice and strengthen that service quality and make changes as they're needed. Next slide. Okay, so once again, prevention services are required to be delivered with ongoing oversight and that continuous learning to support child safety and reduce the risk of foster care entry for the states and the counties. So therefore, monitoring those services and the child and family's progress over time, using the information to understand whether the services are working, and then revisiting plans when risk remains high or there's just a need for change. So CQI is really a practical method that states and the counties can use to put these expectations into action during implementation. Next slide. Okay, so on this slide, California translated federal FFPSA prevention expectations into statewide plans that really define CQI in practice. So the statewide plans establish shared expectations for counties. So the first plan that we have is the California 5-year prevention plan. So this plan outlines CQI as a core component of prevention system design and accountability. Then there's the California FFPS CQI plan. So this plan outlines the statewide CQI framework. And then there's the California FFPS CQI implementation plan. So the implementation plan outlines the approach for the roles in counties, really to make that CQI plan come to life. So counties can operationalize these expectations locally, adapting CQI process and resources that they already have within the county, and then applying those to the evidence-based practices and the continued infrastructure that they're building through FFPS. All right. So why contracts became the bridge? So as CQI expectations expanded at the federal and state level, many prevention contracts were already in place and were not written with the requirements in mind. So in practice, counties often find that contracts predate FFPSA and statewide CQI plans. CQI roles are assumed rather than stated, and expectations about data, the coordination, and learnings are spread across multiple documents. So this is why contracts kind of became that bridge. They're the place where counties can pull the expectations together, make clear CQI roles, responsibilities, and processes that are workable with prevention service partners to solidify successful CQI practices. So, Jen, did I hear you right that we're going to skip the Mentimeters? Because I think the next one was a Mentimeter.
We have it embedded, and so folks can use the chat
Okay.
and just kind of give us a response in the chat if that's all right.
All right. So if folks can give us a response in the chat, as you can see, it's multiple choice. So the question being, what's hardest about aligning CQI expectations with contracts in your county? So if folks, or I'm not sure, Regina, if folks can come off mute, just curious, folks could participate, that would be amazing.
Yes, they can unmute themselves and write in the chat.
Okay, awesome. So we'll give it in a minute or two and see if we get any responses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's helpful. Lots of C's.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And while folks are doing that, I might jump in with a couple of thoughts, Stacie. So
Yeah.
especially as we keep seeing C, right? It's really the counties are going to have a great deal of flexibility to decide who participates. They might want to include a provider at a CQI table if they don't have lots of providers. If you're a larger county and you've got PAT and you've got 20 different providers, nope. You're not going to probably decide to have providers at the CQI table, but instead a designee who's going to go back to providers and work through any of the issues that the data suggests we might have to address. So again, a great deal of flexibility there. Within the CQI implementation plan, we make recommendations on who would be best positioned, again, depending on the size of your county and the number of providers. So I think that's really good. Yeah, figuring out your approach, good. I saw A, contracts predate FFPS. Yep. So what we've also tried to do there, and the D, data variability for EBPs. Within the guidance, we've written a brief that is specific to every single EBP, and even two for FFT, because there's two different versions of FFT across the state of California, partners and LLC. So there's a brief specific that outlines the individual data elements, tools, measures, timeline, training requirements, ratio of staff to families. All of the model specific requirements are embedded in a CQI brief. And so those are connected within the guidance for you to be able to grab material in various sections of your contract directly from the model purveyor requirements. And again, we met with all of those model purveyors to get exactly what they were going to require. So you can feel confident that when you take stuff from the briefs specific to data variability across the EBPs, it will be model specific. And by the way, we had folks in the counties vet these to make sure that they weren't outliers to anything they're already doing, that they were also the same standardized measures, tools, timelines, expectations that were already in place across California. So hopefully you'll find that the guidance is meeting a lot of those needs. Stacie, anything else you want to add there, or should we press on?
We can. I was just going to add. So
Yeah.
I know the CQI plan. I don't know if it was shared with folks ahead of time, but I'm happy to drop things in the chat as resources. I know Jen, you just mentioned the 10 evidence-based practice briefs, and so I can drop some things in the chat for folks if they want to save those and be able to go back and review, and then ask questions at a later time. So
wonderful, wonderful. Yep, and they're all hyperlinked in the guidance too, in the appendix. There's some really robust appendix that we can show you too. Okay, I'm pressing on. So using the EBP contract guidance. So what I'm going to try to do now is actually shift to the guidance. It's not about adding more work. It's about making contracts clearer so the work is easier. That's our attempt. Over time, you'll tell us if we hit the mark or if we need to keep going. But what I want to make sure that we set you up for success with is an overview of what this guidance includes. It's really about organizing CQI expectations into something usable for your county. It organizes language into foundational elements, and we try to use those foundational elements to introduce, in addition to that, EBP specific pieces that you can add in sections called addenda and appendices. It also highlights decision points so counties can be intentional and align expectations with your contracting structure and your capacity. And I'm gonna just leave this here. I know there's lots of clicks for just a second so you can kind of take it in, because we did create some sections that we'll walk you through and we'll explain how the addenda and the appendices are supposed to be used with those foundational elements. Okay, so what the guidance is and what the guidance is not. And you saw this when I was saying about what the session is, but really it's a practical resource, right, to help counties. It's organized around foundational CQI elements. It's designed to support multiple contracting structures. It is not a model contract or required template. We did include a template for you to, kind of steal shamelessly, use how you want, but it as a whole, it is not a template. It's not a replacement for county procurement, legal review, or standard boilerplate terms that you might have. It's not a substitute for the EBP purveyor guidance. The CQI briefs, again, are aligned with those, and you can use those to help you. But again, they're linked. They're not like embedded wholly, right? Because that would have been, you'd have hated us, 200-page guidance versus, right, 30-some page guidance. And it's not a standalone FFPSA contracting guide. It's really just kind of, again, trying to make sure that we hit the high points. Okay, how it's organized. So there is a core piece here that is foundation. Foundational elements are things that stay consistent across all EBPs. So no matter if your county has MI or a different county has PAT, this foundational CQI elemental language is just going to be the core content that you're going to want to use no matter which EBP. There are specific CQI elements for each EBP. And again, we recommend that those get included in the contract as addenda. And you'll see how we do that in just a second. We'll go through some examples. There is cross-cutting elements. They cover things that support CQI, such as candidacy determination or child safety monitoring. Because remember, those are true for every single EBP. Doesn't matter which ones you implement, those things have to be done for every single child. So that cross-cutting information is in there too. And then last, we've got appendices. And the appendices hold the technical details that change more often than all of the standard CQI elements. And so that's where what we were hoping for, folks, was that the appendix would be the things that if there was changes by a model purveyor to a tool, that you would only have to modify the appendix. You wouldn't have to go back and modify the entire contract because it's only going to be referenced in the details of an appendix for that contract. So trying to think ahead about the technical things that might get changed over time, but not all of the core of what you need. Okay. So foundational, let's just stay here. Section 1, and you're going to see if you're opening up the actual guidance, you can follow along. Section 1 shows up on page 3 in the guidance. And this is the foundational contract elements. This is the backbone of your contract. These are the CQI expectations that should stay consistent no matter which EBP you're working with. So instead of rebuilding your contract every time, you have to add a new model, or California maybe amends their prevention plan and there's more options. You're starting from the same core function using these basic elements. There are four main areas. So first is data. This is what gets collected, how it's broken out, and how it's reported. This is often where things are unclear in contracts, so clarity here goes a long way. The second component is CQI participation. This is about the who. Who is actually going to be involved in learning and improvement activities? Not just about the data, but practicing in the process of a 5-step CQI process, reviewing the data, coming up with strategies to help make improvements. All of that is a part of that participation. Third is the workforce. This is making sure staff qualifications and training align with the model requirements. Here we're going to set expectations for who's delivering services and how those staff are prepared. Like what training requirements do they have to participate in? And then the fourth one is service delivery. This covers things like caseload and fidelity, making sure services are delivered in a way that matches the model standards. So one more click here. The key is that these elements stay stable across contracts. What changes is the model-specific detail layered on top of this. You'll see that in the next click when I talk about addendums. And that's what makes contracts more consistent, easier to manage, and easier to update over time. Okay, so I'm going to just real quick, before I get to the addendums, I forgot this is here. So this is telling you about the 3 different sections. So again, if you're following along in the guidance, take a peek at page 6. Each section is set up to help you make decisions, not just give you language. You'll see there's 3 types of guidance that show up. Core decisions are the things you actually have to answer to finalize the contract. Optional considerations are dependent on your county's specific context and capacity. And then implementation tips will help keep things practical and manageable. So it's just our way of taking each of these sections and trying to help you think through some of the core decisions, optional areas that you might want to think about, and then implementation tips. And all of that comes from best practice and our experience supporting 27 different states and jurisdictions with their implementation of EBPs through Family First. We've embedded a lot of that working knowledge and understanding in here. Okay, so I said the second part was about the EBP specifics. It really is this addendum section. It helps us, page 31, by the way, has a template. Appendix A, page 31 of the guidance, we included a template for you to play around with as you think about an addendum that you might embed into one of those core elements of the contract. This is where model differences come in. We really do recommend that you include EBP specific addenda with your contract so that you can capture those really specific CQI requirements. Again, if you want to know what I'm talking about, think about the frequency and the duration of the service delivery, of the caseload or supervisor ratios, specific fidelity and outcomes items that you might be that you might have to track. That's what we're talking about here. And again, we found that it would be really easy to kind of pop, using our template, the CQI specific information in the briefs right into the contract using this addendum section. So you'll have foundational language plus an addendum section when you go and start developing in this. Technical details that change. Again, we want to try to keep those in the appendix so that we hopefully don't overwhelm folks. All right. So the addendum, what does this look like? So if you're looking at page 31 in that guidance, it names the EBP model. It points to the specific guidance, like which brief is aligned. It also is the place to document any county choices where you have flexibility and things that you want to do. And it captures what's specific to the model. For most EBPs, the package is foundational CQI contract elements, right? Section 1, married with a short EBP addendum, and then attaching the relevant appendix. So that's kind of the formula for putting together your contract. Okay, so in the middle of this section, we spend some time specifically focused on motivational interviewing. And the reason is because, well, MI, as we all know, is its own, little beautiful model that is very different from all other EBPs that California included in the plan and really that are really out there. And it's very likely in your counties that you might have your child welfare workforce or your probation workforce who are using MI embedded in casework practice. This guidance, this contracting, right? You're going to use policy, you're going to use standard practice expectations for your child welfare or probation workforce, but you're not for the CBOs that might be using MI. And so the contract guidance that we included here and spending some specific time was really focused on the CBOs who would be delivering MI and participating in the CQI activities. And those folks that'll need this contract. So for MI, counties should retain core functional clauses, everything that we saw in section 1, in the main contract. So things like staff qualifications and training, service delivery and caseload standards, those things stay static. And then the guidance includes MI-specific sample language that builds on those foundations, like the training pathways, the fidelity monitoring, coaching, coding, and then service delivery and documentation standards. Because again, with MI, those are a little special. They're a little different. And so we're trying to have a section that's specific to helping you navigate the MI differences. Okay. Again, I didn't click. So that didn't help you. Clicking, I apologize. Let's put these up here for a second. So you can see exactly again, foundational clauses stay in the main. Specific MI stuff will get added in to an addendum, and it'll kind of help you navigate. And again, specific to the CBOs who would be implementing, not your child welfare workforce, probation, or tribal workforce that is engaged in it. Okay. So what happens next? Section 3 of the guidance, beginning on page 24, if you want to follow along. This focuses on those cross-cutting contract elements. So again, think about the things that are required in Family First, like ongoing monitoring of child safety, eligibility and referral coordination, so candidacy determinations, privacy, consent, and data sharing. This is another big piece nationally, especially with Community Pathway, that folks have had a lot of conversations and a lot of interest in trying to think strategically about how do we make sure that we maintain family privacy and that we get those consents to share the minimal amount of data that's required for Family First reporting. And then oversight, communication, and like an escalation process might be something like what happens if we are not achieving the outcomes set forth in a model, and how do we want to make sure that we have an infrastructure that can go back to the provider level and work through a 5-step CQI process to identify strategies that we could deploy to help improve those outcomes. So think, these elements reinforce CQI without duplicating data, help align contracts with federal and state requirements, and often reference multiple EBPs rather than rewriting all of this each time you have a different EBP. And counties can place those cross-cutting content in the main contract. And again, reference any other policy or anything at your county level that is going to be helpful. Okay, the last section of this guidance includes the appendices. So we went a little hog wild in the appendix. There's a lot. Again, trying to make sure that we are giving you lots of resources that you can take from the appendix and embed in your contract. So by placing all of that technical and change-prone details, again, model purveyors might change a tool. How do we not have to go back to the whole contract, but just change the appendix? That's our goal here, by making sure that those things are only showing up there and that you have those resources to connect to. So we want to see data elements, formats, submission calendars, tool versions and instrument specifications, training schedules, documentation requirements, and then the actual templates that you'll be using to track fidelity and outcomes. All of those show up in these appendix of the guidance. So again, hopefully you can see those and kind of scroll through as you look at that resource. Okay. I'm going to move us to just emphasize and then get some of your thoughts again, folks. So my emphasis is that we're trying to be flexible here. Lots of flexibility in how this is developed for you with the goal of you crafting it, putting this, again, you might not even use a contract, right? You might, here, let's get this up here. You might use an MOU. You might use a scope of work. You might use a statement of work or something in your county. So whatever that is, the resource is trying to help set you up for success and embedding it in whatever resource you use. And then you've got your main section, your addendum, and your appendix, and you can identify specifically who fulfills which CQI roles. So we thought we might just ask you, we're kind of curious. In your counties, are you using contracts with providers? Is it an MOU? Is it a statement of work? What do you tend to put together when you need to have that ongoing relationship and monitoring of CQI activities and outcomes? If you can put it in the chat, we'd love to see. Okay, a couple of contract responses. Scope of work attached, okay. Yep, boilerplate language. So think of this, the contract elements section for FFPS as the boilerplate language that you might want to incorporate if you have multiple folks that you're contracting with. Okay. So not statements of work. That's interesting. I didn't see a single response on the statements. And I've heard that in a couple of counties. Okay. Anything else that we didn't even offer as an example that folks want to come off mute and share? Okay. No worries. Okay. How about we dig in with a couple of examples? How are we doing on time, team? Are we doing okay?
Yeah, I think so, Jen.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, so practical way. How do I even start this? So identify the foundational CQI contract elements. That's section 1. Use the guidance to set the baseline expectations. Draft the contract language using the guidance. So you'll see in the guidance, we have all these blue sections, and we gave you language that is specific to every single one of these foundational contract elements. So you can steal directly from it and see what matches and what meets your need. And then you just begin to make the tweaks and modifications. Figure out what are the county specific choices that you want to make. And again, it'll be very clear as you start to immerse yourself in those blue sections. And then really think about your addendums and what content you want to make sure you're embedding in as you go through each of those elements that are, again, going to line back to the model specific. So it's set up to help you go through that. There's specific places where counties can make choices. So counties can decide who participates, where CQI language lives, how expectations are carried out throughout your process. There's optional considerations related to specific data fields beyond the baseline categories, like if you need additional data fields for your county. Data quality checks, validation steps, follow-up processes. Again, think about that 5-step CQI process and what aspects of that you want to utilize. And any contingencies for delayed systems or submissions, like what are we going to do if we don't have data and we, have to like reach out and engage providers in a more in-depth conversation. How it shows up in the guidance, again, these three different areas that we looked at briefly before, the core decisions, the optional considerations, and the implementation tips, all of those are giving you suggestions on what you might want to embed. Okay, I've got one more discussion question here. Which type of CQI clause is hardest to draft clearly in your contracts? So again, think of these as the core components. When you think about data collection and reporting, is that really hard to embed? Or CQI participation rules, structures, EBP specific fidelity expectations, cross-cutting requirements like the safety and the eligibility, candidacy approvals. Are you concerned about privacy, consent, data sharing, as I shared other states are? And maybe we're just not sure. But if you've kind of tackled or started to think about any of this, we're wondering where your concerns are at this point. Yep, fidelity expectations. Yep, the cross-cutting requirements. We were recently engaged in a conversation with a jurisdiction about tapping, especially for safety and risk, tapping into existing processes, not recreating or developing something new, but figuring out like PAT has a very specific measure that they use for ongoing safety and risk monitoring. Use that, right? Embed it in your CQI activities so that you're asking on a like maybe twice a year, right? Every 6 months. Can we see your safety assessment results? What does it look like? How are the families doing? Do we have concerns? Encouraging, again, ongoing, community support structures or mandated reporting if we have to go there. So lots of good resources embedded in the CQI briefs related to each of these. But understand that, there's nuances within all of the EBPs that might help you get to an understanding of what are their specific fidelity and what are their specific safety measures that you could pull from instead of having to reinvent. Okay, just a couple of responses. Yep, privacy. And so I'm talking a lot, and if I'm losing you, I apologize. Let's get into an example. I hope you'll bear with me here while we kind of unpack how this could look for PAT, right? So we'll use PAT to demonstrate how the guidance translates foundational CQI contract elements into usable contract language. We're going to apply it to data collection and reporting and then to CQI participation. And what we tried to do was highlight where counties make choices without hard coding, the various tools, workflows, or policies that you might have. So I'm going to pop up that 4 steps that we were talking through before, but I really want us to just kind of look at the bottom of each of these. So for step 1, what are the foundational CQI? I chose for us data collection and reporting. So if we're going to go and try to make sure that data collection and reporting is embedded in our contract specific to PAT, then you want to specify who's going to report what and when. What's the ongoing cadence? So like on a monthly basis in your CQI work group, you might want to be able to look at who are we reaching? How many referrals have we received? How much capacity is being utilized? Right? And how many open slots do we have so that we can increase referrals? That's just an example. You're going to reference that CQI PAT specific brief, and you're going to bring in the data elements that are specific to data collection and reporting in an addendum. You're going to be clear about who within the provider will be submitting data, where the data is going to get submitted. So I said reach data, like how many families were referred, how many families are in service. That might be captured in your CARES provider portal, right? Versus fidelity and outcomes, there's templates that you would capture that on. And so how often, what are the areas that, again, who, where, and how we're going to be capturing each of those specific data requirements. And then the last piece here gets us to step 4, where we get into the specific requirements using the EBP addendum. So if you go to Appendix A, you have a template there you can pull, and you could say, okay, we're focused on PAT. The CQI brief tells me that I'm going to get an annual report from the PAT purveyor. And so I'm going to make sure that I'm putting that expectation of reviewing, having it submitted to it within the back end of the CARES provider portal so that the state can also see it. All of this is laid out for you, EBP specific within the brief. And so it just sets you up for success to grab that information and pop it in as you move through that 4th step. And what it turns out to look like is this. Lots of stuff on the slide here, but this is like where we're trying to get you to so that you can say clearly the contracted agency shall enter monthly capacity and reach data into the CARES provider portal. If you have any specific requirements that, in addition to that, you'll put it in. Submit individual level fidelity and outcomes data to the county quarterly. Submit aggregate fidelity and outcomes data to CDSS. Again, this is all outlined as existing requirements on the federal and state side. So it's just giving you the language that you can embed in the contract. Include required disaggregation fields. We always want to be able to go back and ask the question, how many families from different races, ethnicities, age groups, genders were we able to reach? Because the outcomes then should give us some better indication of how well these models meet various populations' needs. And so that's another important component. And again, that's going to be captured within the provider portal of CARES. Coordinate with the county's designated CQI lead to resolve data quality issues and support improvement activities. That's going to be flexible. You're going to figure out exactly who has that hat and plays that role within your county. Correct identified data errors. Make sure that you are thinking about what time frames you want that information back. Is there a specific template in which they're sharing that information so that you can identify maybe gaps or areas to be strengthened? Comply with county privacy, consent, and data sharing requirements for the individual level or sensitive data. And you've got the county specific policy or different things that might inform that. And then maintain and share child safety monitoring documentation, applicable federal requirements, contract privacy consents, and then provide data directly to the county within, and you'll specify the time frame. So think of this as like a core section of the PAT related to data collection. And that's what the guidance is going to generate for you, and then you get to enhance. I'm tempted to go for one more part of PAT. There's another part around CQI participation. And so again, this would be like, okay, you get to decide who's participating and keep the CQI participation expectations in the main contract part, and then describe CQI participation requirements at a very high level in the main, and then use the addendum for who, on behalf of, how often, and then which details can be flexible. And then include, again, the PAT specific sections relative to how the data is captured and how it's shared and who participates in the review process. So we just wanted to give you a couple of examples. This one, again, is the specific language that would pull out of the guidance relative to you might want to put in for CQI participation. You're defining who's going to do that, what data is going to come to the CQI table, the staff responsible for the participation and coordination, any follow-up activities, how we're going to handle that. the frequency in which we're going to be meeting, the location, all those logistics, and then support coordination between the activities, the service delivery, while complying with applicable privacy and consent requirements. So there is, again, just some stuff for you to be able to think about grabbing directly out and then applying to a model like PAT. Okay. The addendum, again, remember, will be the model specific, and this will take you back to required data elements, individual level versus aggregate reporting, fidelity and outcomes tools that are specific to PAT, pre-service, ongoing role-specific expectations, what your dosage is, like PAT can be up till the child enters kindergarten, right? Modality, caseload supervision, wait list handling, how those things want to be managed and attended to within your county. What we are trying to avoid with the addendums is having to go back and repeat the material that's in the main part of the contract, so those core elements, and just really start to dig into the specific CQI requirements that are affiliated or associated with PAT in this example. Okay. And always looking for the opportunity to pair these with the appendix that are in the back of the guidance, because those get really drilled in. Motivational interviewing, I said this earlier, this is a really big one in a lot of the CPPs across the state. So we have an example here and are trying to be really cognizant of the differences that you're going to encounter related to implementation of MI. As we said earlier, you might have multiple settings in which you've got different providers using MI. You might have staff using it alongside of other interventions, and you might have to pay attention to double dipping, making sure that they only bill for one intervention for the hour in which they're with the family and not billing, MI and HFA, for example, right? So paying attention to those variables and how MI is different and can be paired with other models. Training and fidelity structures that differ from traditional EBPs, right? You might use Listen, right? You might have an AI assisted listen training, and you might not, have a trainer that is actually engaging your staff. What else on here? Yep, the same CQI elements apply to MI. So things like data collection and reporting, right, that we were looking at, CQI participation, all of that stays static for MI as well. It's just looking at the nuances of who and how often you're going to, and the differences in training and things. It just really is one of those models that requires a little bit more definition and a little bit more of the thoughtful integration within the contracts. Okay. Yeah, you're going to see, I said this earlier, but we put a section in section 2, we put some specific guidance relative to MI. And then again, the MI brief is available so that you can integrate what are those requirements from the state. And this does vary, folks, right? Different states have, different thresholds because MI is so different. It really is going back to the brief and how the state of California has set us up for understanding what's going to be expected when you think about implementing and monitoring outcomes and training and fidelity to MI. No model purveyor associated with MI, right? That's another key piece of it that's very different. Okay. Thanks for putting that in, Stacie. Okay, so let's look. So monitoring fidelity, coding, and coaching. This is another core element, right? So when we think about MI, fidelity, monitoring, coding, and coaching, we want to rely on the MI specific guidance. We really want to know how the state is asking us to make sure that we're tracking fidelity and how often folks are getting additional coding and coaching based on how well they're scoring in fidelity, right? There's some differences there. You can claim, no matter where staff are in the process of achieving competence or hitting a score of good on the mighty. Competence is the threshold for the MICA, right? But either way, you can keep claiming, you can keep moving forward, you can keep doing CQI activities, even if people haven't hit those thresholds, because the expectation is that you're monitoring and intervening and working to provide them more coding and coaching and supervisory supports, whatever your county is going to do. That's totally fine as long as they are still ongoing with their monitoring and you're looking at it from a CQI lens. So at step 2, you'll use the guidance to draft the contract language, and you'll use the MI subsection that is in section 2. You'll reference the state-approved MI fidelity monitoring approaches. I just spoke to MICA and MIghty, and listen, by the way, right? You have 3 in California that you can utilize, and align coding and coaching cadence with proficiency levels. As I said, competent or good. And then you're going to make the county choices explicit when you're thinking about which fidelity measure you choose to use. You don't have to do all 3. You can choose to use listen, and that's totally fine. Who is going to provide coaching? If it's listen, no problem. If it's an individual or individuals that are on contract, no problem. You're going to embed that in. And then you're going to talk about what supports are acceptable for ongoing skill development. And again, county specific here. Lots of good recommendations in the brief, but not requirements. And then when you get to the model specific, you're going to start by referencing the applicable MI guidance and then use the addendum to record, which tools, which coaching roles, which cadence, and keep those technical, really deep parts within your appendix. So what does this end up looking like in actual contract language? So we're going to use a state-approved, county-specific MI fidelity monitoring tool. And you can specify, as I said, listen or MICA or MIghty. You're going to conduct MI coding and coaching at the cadence defined in the brief with increased frequency if folks are not at that proficiency level. You're going to get those, provide coaching supports aligned with the fidelity results. Maybe it's at a supervisory level, maybe it's at a coaching level. You're going to coordinate fidelity monitoring, coaching, and supervision to support skill development and participate in CQI follow-up activities based on where folks are functioning in their fidelity. And so this is another just really detailed example, hopefully making sense to folks to think about how to gather and use the guidance to craft these various sections based on a specific model. Okay, I'm tempted to push us forward. I did have another one about documentation. I'll scroll through it and give you a second to kind of take it in because my slide is going to definitely want to get a couple of clicks. But MI documentation is, again, one of those pieces that is being embedded in the provider portal. Or if you're in a CBO, you'll be documenting it within your own systems to make sure that we're able to, if the feds were to conduct an audit, we've got a record that says when MI was used. And remember, all of the EBPs have to be listed in the family well-being plan, right? At the federal level, that's called a child-specific prevention plan. But in California, Stacie, I think we're calling it a family well-being plan. And so the inclusion of any EBP has to be in that plan, right? And then within your contract, you're going to want to make sure that that is an expectation, that there is a plan for each child, that the MI intervention is listed as an intervention specifically that this child will benefit from. By the way, even if you use MI with the parents, even if you use it with the caregivers and not the child, it still needs to be included as the intervention in the plan that is going to benefit the child. The child will benefit from the parents receiving MI. And so all of that follows federal guidance, but those documentation requirements for all of the EBPs get a little unique when you start thinking about the use of a provider portal or about the use of your system to say, this is a date when MI was utilized. And here's who I used it with, so that we can always go back and have that information available. So you'll have the ability to set that up within your county. And there's just a lot of good guidance here to help frame how that might be captured. And again, specific section for documentation, right? Because think of documentation as its own specific core element. And then we've got a section of language in your contract relevant to that. So I'll give you a second to kind of take that in. Okay. Got one more slide here before we start to get to thinking about next steps. So this is, again, the MI specific addendum. And again, just giving you all the different headers that you will want to think through. So data and reporting, measurement tools, training and qualifications, and then service delivery standards. In each addendum, remember, we're trying to avoid bringing in all that other standard language, and we're trying to get real model specific. Okay. From guidance to action. So next steps. If you were to try to take what we've been discussing and apply it for the very first step, what we're recommending at this point, because I know you might be already thinking about who your EBP providers are, you might be thinking about who you're going to be contracting with. We want you to choose a starting point and a document path, and then think about who are the people that need to be a part of your conversation or you're thinking about contracts. So that first step is pick one CQI enhancement to anchor the work. Select one expectation. So maybe it's the role, maybe it's the cadence, maybe it's the deliverable, or maybe it's the data expectations. Again, just pick one and then ground it in one real contract example. So you can go to the guidance, you can pick out just one, and then you can start to immerse yourself in that section. And then think about what goes in a main contract. What are the stable requirements, roles, governance, accountability? What is the EBP specific? So again, one model, think about what's specific. What is the brief I'm going to grab? What in the appendix are going to be helpful to me? And is there any additional things that I need to include from the county level? And you'll be thinking about where does this go within that framework? And then you're going to go to step 3, align and think about who needs to be a part of this. Are there contracts people? Are there program people? Are there CQI people? Are there providers? Are there legal folks that you would want to meet with? Who's going to be that owner of that first draft? And start tinkering with just one contract element, one area for enhancement. Okay, a discussion question again. What's one CQI related contract element you want to strengthen next? If you think about a small test of change that spans the next 60 to 90 days, not a full contract overhaul. We're not recommending you go, dive in full bore with all aspects, but just maybe one. Which element would be the low-hanging fruit in your mind? Yep, data collection. Reporting requirements. Yep. Okay, staff qualifications and training. Yes, you can grab those right out of the brief. What's specific to that model? Any others? Reporting requirements. Thanks, Terry. Service delivery and caseload standards. Yep, again, very model specific there. MI is an outlier there, right? There isn't specific service delivery or caseload standards that you have to abide by. So I'd start with one that is very specific if you're digging in for the first time. Yeah, CQI participation requirements. So in the implementation plan, we were pretty explicit that we recommend in the first year of implementation that you meet monthly with your whoever holds the contract, or if it's, again, if you only have a few providers, maybe it's with the providers, but we recommend monthly CQI meetings in that first year. Get your feet wet, dive deeply in, make sure that we are tracking all of the federal and state requirements and that we have the ability to kind of move through the process. So you can grab that right out of the brief as well. We've included it right in each individual brief. Okay, a couple more A's, data collection. Yep. Okay, fantastic. I think we're cruising a little bit, Stacie. So we can go into the kind of closing and maybe then just take down the screen and talk to folks a little bit. I'll hand it back over to you, though.
All right. Okay, so today we walked through how contracts can be practical, powerful tools for bringing CQI expectations to life. So we really reinforced why CQI appears in FFPS contracts and how the EBP CQI contracting guidance is organized and how the counties can really apply it consistently across different models like Jen reviewed with PAT and MI. So most importantly, we focus on turning the expectations into clear, usable contract language that strengthens not only the roles, but data practices, fidelity, and improvement cycles. So as you leave today, we hope that you feel confident about where to start, going back to what Jen had just went over, about choosing one CQI expectation, deciding where it belongs in your contract structure, and then identifying the partners needed to build that. Again, I will reiterate, you do not have to overhaul everything at once. Small intentional steps make CQI more sustainable and aligned with federal and state requirements. So our hope today is that you leave with clarity, a practical path moving forward, and the tools you need to strengthen your CQI expectations within that's going to be supportive for not only the providers, but counties and essentially the families we serve. And then for key takeaways, again, guidance is designed to help you really translate CQI expectations into clear contract language. Strong contracts separate what is stable from what should remain flexible. And again, counties and folks do not have to revise everything all at once. Examples like PAT and MI show how the same approach applies across very different EBPs while still honoring those model specific needs. Just want to thank all of you for joining today. I know we have some time, so Jen and I will be on. So if there's any questions, if folks want to come off mute, we definitely have some time to just have a conversation.